Did my uncle really box a Dogman? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I don't know if this would be useful for your channel or not, but I used to have a crazy Uncle Lazlo who told us stories about fighting these humanoid animals that I think might have actually been Dogmen. I mean, he never called them that. I don't think he knew the word Dogman. But in retrospect, it seems to both me and my younger brother, this might have been what he was talking about. I'm not going to say that my uncle never exaggerated. In fact, he had a reputation for wild stories. But the fact remains that he never used the word Dogman to describe what he fought, and he never tried to get any publicity drawn to himself because of these old stories he'd tell. It seemed like something he actually wanted to keep hushed up because, well, let me just tell it to you in order of how I think it happened, and then you can sort of hopefully see my point. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing a guy would have made up, not even my crazy uncle. Now, my uncle was stationed in Australia during his time in the service. This would have been back in the 80s or 90s, I guess. And that was where he became involved in boxing kangaroos. I'm not sure if that's still legal these days or if it was legal back then either, but I know it was still happening. Maybe it's going on today, I wouldn't know. I raised the term of animal cruelty one time to my uncle, and he said it was more like human cruelty because the kangaroos won as often as they didn't. Regardless of any of that, it was when my uncle was back in Michigan, shortly after being discharged from the service, that he fell into an illegal underground fight club scene, in which he claimed he was sent into the ring to fight this American kind of kangaroo. It was sort of a mix between a wolf and a roo. It didn't jump around. It walked upright on its hind legs. And not only did they have boxing gloves on these particular animals, they had muzzles on their long snouts as well. These were more like upright walking canines than kangaroos, but they were about the same size as the roos, and there was a pretty heavy underground following for watching their fights and betting on the same. Uncle Lazlo told us that this was run by organized crime and he never had any idea what the animals he fought were, or where the mob managed to capture them. Since he had just gotten out of the service and was introduced to this line of illegal work by some of his buddies from his tour of duty, he assumed these were foreign exotic animals shipped into the United States. In fact, he had a sort of presumption that they came from the Middle East and were discovered during one of the conflicts that the U.S. got itself involved with over there toward the end of the last century. I'm of the opinion that the beasts were probably captured right there in Michigan, the same state the fights took place in. If they were imported from anywhere, it was probably from across the border up in Canada. I think those were Dogmen, and everyone knows that Dogmen come from the Midwest. And the mob of that day simply imported them into Detroit itself, where they were kept in captivity and used to fight humans in the boxing ring for people to bet on. Apparently there was a huge underground racket for watching these fights. Now, I have no idea how they put boxing gloves on kangaroos before they put them in the boxing ring, so I certainly have no idea how a Dogman can be fitted with the same. I once asked Uncle Lazlo how it was done, and he only got annoyed at me. I took that to mean that he didn't know how they did it either. My guess would be that they put some kind of knockout drug in the Dogman's food, then waited till he was asleep to tie the gloves and booties onto him. Because these Dogmen, or American kangaroos as my Uncle Lazlo used to call them, had claws on their hands and claws on their feet, both of which needed to be covered and heavily padded in order to prevent them from ripping apart their human opponents, not to mention the referees and probably half the audience. Uncle Lazlo said the American kangaroos were far more vicious than the Australian ones, and they were significantly harder to beat in the ring as well. According to my uncle, the creatures were about the same size as the men, around 6 feet, but they had ears up on top of their heads, which gave them the illusion of a height advantage. They tended to fight in a manic way in the early rounds, but if they didn't score an early knockout, you could often outlast them and win in later rounds. The creatures seemed built for shorter bursts of speed, while Lazlo claimed to be one of those slow and steady wins the race kinds of fighters. He told us he'd be on defense for at least the first 3 rounds against these creatures that I think were Dogmen. His plan, or really his coach's plan which he chose to follow, was to let the creature tire itself out, then try to win the fight on points. He never succeeded in knocking any of them out, although he did tell us he'd had his block knocked off more than once by one of them. That's kind of the part of it that makes me wonder if this all might have been for real. I mean, if he was making it all up, wouldn't he have told us that he won? That he beat the Dogman up and knocked it out? It seems like if it was a fishtail, then he would have won in the ends of the stories. Instead, Uncle Lazlo always seemed to end these stories wide-eyed and shaking his head at the memories. One time I asked him whatever became of the people on that scene, and he told me nervously that he didn't want to know. When I asked him what he thought happened to the animals, he got visibly upset and told me that he didn't care as long as he never had to see any of them ever again. Even years afterward, he was quite shaken up by the memory of what he called the American kangaroos. Would he have been acting that way if these were just stories he made up to entertain his nephews? I asked Uncle Lazlo if he thought the fights were still going on, and if I could get to see one of them. He told me it was possible that the fights might still be happening, but he lost his connections to all that long ago. The reason he left the fights is that they got shut down quietly by the feds, with the heads of the operation disappearing suddenly. Maybe to federal prison, or maybe who knows where. That didn't mean that someone else might not have started it all up again somewhere else. Most likely someone with deep enough pockets to pay the feds off to keep it quiet. But Uncle Lazlo said the fights were so dangerous and so risky that it's also quite possible that they were never revived. There are so many simpler ways to make money, so many less risky and dangerous things to bet your money on. It might well have all disappeared into the black hole of history, never to return. Our uncle left us in 2016, sadly, with no way to answer any of these questions. There was no deathbed admission of lying about any of this. It's not like he ever renounced the stories. Then again, it's not like this was the subject of conversation too often toward the end either. This was considered trivial by Lazlo and the family, and to me, that also adds to the idea that it might have just been a collection of true anecdotes. Still, it's impossible to know another person's mind, so who can say if this is something that my uncle would have felt a reason to concoct? I mean, if he were alive today, with all the current popularity of the Dogman, maybe he would have had some motivation to tell made-up Dogman stories. But since he never heard of the Dogman, and never called the creatures either that, or werewolves, or wolfmen, or anything of that nature, I'm kind of left feeling as though he had no motivation to lie about any of this subject. Which only brings me back around full circle to asking the same question I asked to start this all off. And that question is, did my uncle really box a Dogman?
Hey, you. Yeah, you. Did you know that all of us here on the internet can see when you watch us? Well, it's true. And that's why you should dress appropriately for what you're looking at. For instance, right now, you could be wearing this badass Dr. Death t-shirt starring me, Dr. Death himself. And that ice-cold beverage you're enjoying could be mingling with ice cubes inside of this Dr. Death glass. We also have Bigfoot and Dogman t-shirts for those of you who prefer those guys for whatever reason. But if you do buy Henry merch or Bigfoot or whatever, please also consider supporting the old doctor, huh? My Social Security check stopped coming a couple of years after I died, you know.
Our executive producer is S.A. Rose. They're a PayPal Club member. I do suppose their donation came through just today, so we need to thank our dear S.A. Please join us in thanking S.A. Rose, a $7 PayPal Club member who joined up at peterbernard.com. S.A. gets to see our secret uncensored stories, of which we produce 4 per month, and also gains access to our over 24 hours of secret uncensored Dogman archives. Here to explain more about the cool perks you can get for helping us stay alive is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/peterbernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.